All right.
Great.
Welcome
Awesome.
to Social Impact Power Chats. We're already having a good time here with Corey and Bryan.
Corey was doing
Um,
face exercises as we came on here.
we'll have some bloopers. We'll have some bloopers afterwards
Yeah,
to get people cracking up. So I'm already excited
it's good.
for
Good.
the humor of what we're about to have, but also for just the value that I know we're going to get out of this power chat. So without
Mm.
further ado, maybe Corey will ask you first, and then Bryan, you can do a quick piggyback. But the first question is, how did you get into this work? How did you become known as social impact gurus and amazing lights that you are?
Well, first of
Mm.
all, thank you for that compliment. I don't often get called a social impact guru. Um, after 15 years, I call it in and around government, doing stuff in the public sector, and that was on all sides of that equation. I actually found myself in this strange spot where I had been working, in data for a long time. I had been around when the first open data policies were crafted. And I was in San Francisco where innovation was, in the wind. And I found my way to Splunk. After working in the public sector, I found my way to Splunk. And it was an interesting time for them because they were only about 800 employees. And so I came in with the charge of being the first person to help them dip their toe into social impact. And I very quickly realized that this was going to be a big challenge. But they wanted me to be able to cross those different sectors and speak those different languages. And so I spent about 7 years there building everything from the ground up. And that includes everything from employee facing programs to engineering teams so that we could have product driven impact. And then also spinning up venture funds and workforce development partnerships and a lot of things that we really had no business doing. But because we were thinking about it very clearly, I think we were able to inject it into the business and really tap into some amazing energy from the company and the employees as they grew very, very rapidly. So over the course of that time, they went from 800 employees to almost 7,000. They went from 200 million a year in revenue to 2.5 billion. So as you might imagine, a bit of a roller coaster ride.
And because you embedded so early throughout the organization as you scaled, I'm assuming that the work was able to scale and you were helping to sort of manage a growing portfolio as opposed to like starting from scratch as the company got bigger, which is always amazing.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to describe it. I wish it were as simple as you described.
Yeah, that's right.
Scratch-ish. Okay.
That's
Yeah.
right.
We'll double click into that, Corey. Bryan, how did we find you on this cruise ship of goodness?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So I think we have my mom and the Boy Scouts to thank when I was a kid. My mom always had us volunteering, especially on holidays. I often was dressed as a snow person or a snowman at a series of group homes back in Kansas City. And that was where I sort of knew that the path of giving back and in community was important for me. And I knew that too in my scouting journey as well as a kid. So parlayed that into a little bit of call it embedded philanthropy inside a Greek organization in college. And then in my work life, I went away from impact for a number of years. And then when I volunteered in India in 2001, I returned for a role at Salesforce and was one of the first 100 folks in there and joined the steering committee of Salesforce Foundation and helped shape that. So I went into that employment talking about my volunteering and having, open arms receptivity to those stories as opposed to needing to closet being impact oriented at Salesforce. And that helped a bunch. And we did a bunch of really important things there, I think, with salesforce.org. And then LinkedIn was gracious enough to help me extend my career with them and build out the nonprofit facing programs. And that all just kept sort of building on itself. I was in a position where I was thinking, do I want to move off into a world of doing interpersonal content and like leading workshops on helping people like find their purpose and that sort of thing. And I actually started living it so much with LinkedIn for Good and LinkedIn for Nonprofits. I was like, I'm going to stay in the corporate space because I'm getting as fulfilled as I thought I needed to go educate others about finding your purpose. I was living it. So as that purpose got really reinforced with LinkedIn for nonprofits, it was when Box called and Box.org needed to get created. We knew that we got to also do more than just sort of like face the market, the nonprofit market, but we got to face the employees and the philanthropy and create all those scalable mechanisms similar to where Corey was. So when I was at Box, he was at Splunk. We were good friends, wound up at the same conferences and we're on a hike after a couple more stops for me. And it was like, why are we in house all the time? Let's go help everybody else. Let's start a company. So that's 2 years ago.
Amazing. So yes, so let's pick up there. There's a reason that we are on this call all together. You are our first, this is our first three-way social impact power chat, which is super exciting.
Nice little triad.
I know our triad chat, and I think we'll be starting a trend. It's already my favorite chat. You know, we're on this call together for a reason. You all have, you know, hung a shingle together, as it were. Catch us up to speed. What are you doing together? What are you building? And how is it creating more impact in the impact world?
Yeah, I mean,
So
for
one
us,
of the things.
Go ahead, Corey. Start it off. Yours will be cleaner. I'll wander all over the place.
So one of the things that we realized when we were in our various roles in-house was that there's an emerging trend and need for companies to be able to build this kind of capacity. If not, like in terms of a formal team, absolutely needing to be able to build it into the DNA of the companies, especially where employees are asking about it all the time, and employers are learning how to differentiate it a little bit. But what we also notice is that the companies that are already past their kind of public threshold, so they've already had an IPO or some other type of public event, they're typically already at least aware of the things that are going on if they haven't already made an investment. So where we've decided to focus our time and energy is primarily among those that are just before that point, that inflection point for them, right? And so before they've had a public event, we call it Series C plus, so it's kind of mid-stage companies that are still in private, and they have some orientation or some appreciation for what can be done, but they really need to get acquainted with all the different ins and outs of things like ESG and CSR and all the acronym soup that you can imagine. So what we do is we actually work with both founders and funders on the VC and private equity side to help them get oriented around what is ESG, what is impact, what should you be doing, and where are the real opportunities? Like not just thinking about this in terms of a compliance exercise or something that they have to do or something that they have to spend money on because the employees are begging them to do it, but also trying to find ways to inject it into the middle of a business so that they can actually create value and align it with what their core operating strategy is. That's what Vital does.
It's brilliant. And, you know, Bryan, I'll let you chime in 2 seconds. One of the things I love about what you all do, there are, you know, for those not particularly familiar with the VC ecosystem, so many professionals that sit within those communities and organizations that help plus up areas of a C plus company that that needs support. So whether it's legal or IT or whatever. So what I love about what you all are doing is it takes our seat at the table. It says impact needs to be treated the same way we would with any other piece of a business that's critical for it organizationally, for us to be a healthy, you know, product and process team. So thank you for taking that seat and for helping, you know, what I think all of us in this ecosystem are trying to do, which is really level up, professionalize, create some real sophistication around this work, because it's what it needs to be successful, number one. And number two, it's time. So everything that you're doing, I love. Bryan, I didn't know if you wanted to add into anything Corey shared about the current team and what you all are up to.
No, just very briefly, Corey's right. Like on the funder side, like it's been amazing to have the VC community realize that they do invest in product and go to market and legal and talent, but they weren't embedding value accretive impact strategy, right? So well embedded value strategy that does lead then to a revenue lift or a brand lift or a culture lift or an employment brand lift, or what we see as like future proofing the compliance stuff that's around the corner. So I think that funder community sees us as proven operators that can do it. But then you look at the operators themselves and are thinking, well, we're earlier, so impact per se. And we do define that pretty broadly. It's the entire acronym soup that we kind of roll in, because you think what's material to each individual organization is different. And so when the operators approach us, we're very much asking them quickly, you know, what KPIs is the business achieving? What are the OKRs? And I think that the OKRs that get you there versus bolting this work in and hoping that it finds its way into the other core departments of those growth engines is kind of what we've seen has been what has gotten us busy, even in these really interesting times, really kind of call it hard times for capital flow.
Yeah, well, speaking my language. So that's incredible. I want to take us to just a real micro example. Like, let's put some meat on the bones of this concept. You know, someone's listening who's a professional at an organization, think it could be any size, any scale, anything. What's just a really great piece of advice you have for them related to work that you've created that's been successful? What would you want to share with them if you were having coffee and they were asking you questions directly about how to get valuable impact work done?
I mean, I'll start on this one quickly, but if you're having coffee, you better be able to answer the question of what does every C-level executive and a couple of board members in your organization focus on? Where are they prioritizing their energy? And if your strategy isn't tied squarely into the center of the bullseye of those topics, then you're not in good shape right now.
And I'll just build on that because as you're talking to finance leaders or others in the C-suite, you really need to figure out what your value is to each of those different parts of the business. So if you're talking to the CFO, how are you going to be accretive either on the compliance side or in terms of revenue generation? But you have to also be thinking about the people side, where it's employee-facing programs, the sales side, where it's how you engage customers and partners and all those other folks in your ecosystem, as well as the product side, right? Because for so many SaaS companies, and this is an easy one for Bryan and I to speak to just because we've lived it, it's important for you to be able to put your product to work in service of these amazing causes, because it helps to anchor things. And this translates into the other part of the organization, the marketing side, where you can start to tell stories that are much more compelling, much more relatable, much more human than anything your business is ever going to do in any other way, because so many sophisticated software companies have product marketers leading the charge, and that's really important for early days. But as you move your stack up and you mature your organization and your sales motion a little bit, you have to be able to tell stories that executives are going to be able to relate to, because they're going to be less concerned with product features and more concerned with who are we doing business with? How does this serve organizations? How is this going to help us? And so you have to find easy ways for them to be able to relate to some pretty sophisticated products in a way that is meaningful to them.
Yeah.
So any impact leader or any person tasked with trying to start figuring it out needs their 8-slide manifesto for the executive leadership team that the board would also get a lot of value out of. So if you don't have that in draft, get that started.
So, great tip, get started, utilize maybe a secret weapon C-suite partner. If there's somebody who's really a champion, have that conversation
100%.
with that person early. I know from just talking to both of you previously, you had some early champions within the organizations that you really got your footing, and that made a difference. You all could rattle these in your sleep, but just again, to kind of add to the cheat sheet of our social impact power chat, would you just list off a few KPIs that you think, or, OKRs, I think was the term you used, Bryan, that you all go to as you think about how to do proof in the pudding? You're speaking to a C-suite leader, all the beautiful, picturesque impact stories are amazing, but these are brass tacks days, right? What are some go-to stats and data that you lean into when you're thinking about, really making sure these programs can be sticky with an audience that needs that level of accountability?
I mean, straight up, it's like, can the work of the impact team help the company sell more stuff? I'm going to probably get vilified by some folks in our space, but if you can't help that company like showcase its core competency, then your program is probably not going to scale to the point that it could. And then from there, you can speak to standard marketing metrics, kind of underpinning that creation of the pipeline around it. And the emphasis being on a future-proofed product that's accessible and can kind of hold up to the issues that society faces alongside the niche that your ICP, your ideal customer profile, is facing. And then there's certainly like an employee NPS score. Once you've injected purpose through impact strategy, whether that be sustainability, social, or governance itself, because everybody's wired a little bit different, you're going to create purpose and people are going to be fighting the battle for you. And that's going to be reflected in the NPS with their hearts and not just their brains. Corey, any thoughts that you'd want to tack on?
Yeah, I will just add on to that. I do think that the revenue is a big one, right? Because as every company is growing, especially within the last couple of years, capital is difficult to come by, and everybody's focusing more and more on ARR, annual recurring revenue, right? And so to the extension, to the extent that you can contribute to the growth of the company, and there's lots of ways to do this while you're still achieving your impact-facing missions, but that is the metric. Right. And so everybody needs to understand that is, regardless of whether that's your core responsibility, you are still a contributor in that way. I used to have one of our CEOs, Doug Merritt, used to say, we're all in sales. And the reality is that everybody is contributing in one way or another. Some are more directly and some are indirectly. I used to make introductions. I used to help open doors and relationships to our sales folks. I used to find ways to get them stories and get them equipped with what our narrative was as a company, in terms of what our impact work looked like, who our customers were, who our partners were, so that anytime they found themselves in the situation where it was relevant, they could actually introduce these things and they could recite them, and it was part of their storyline. So finding ways to integrate into that operation and align yourself to their primary objectives, I think, is the most valuable thing that you can do, and it'll give you more staying power.
Bryan?
Yes.
I
I was
thought
just going to say,
Yeah.
no matter how deeply and authentically and heartfelt you are about impact, as I am, as everyone who knows me for 20, 30 years of my career knows, but language like theory of change and language like, outcomes versus inputs and outputs and that sort of thing, like you can become awash very quickly, and you can become irrelevant quickly, and you can be held outside of the decision making of a company too quickly if the way with which you enter those conversations is so impact centric that you don't realize necessarily that the government or the organizational, the operating mechanism scaling also means you get to scale if you've bolted that in. So it is commensurate. That scale is commensurate. But the impact professionals have to show up, with the business language, or especially in these times, or the program is going to be too small or irrelevant, or it's going to get cut.
And I think you raise a really important point there, Brian, and it's about translating, right? It's about trying to find ways not just to tell
100%.
stories, but to speak in all these different languages. Because as you're interfacing with nonprofit organizations, you have to be able to speak their language effectively, while also communicating what the value of a product is, what the value, what the value proposition for your business is going to be for working with those organizations. But you likewise need to be able to turn around and speak to the executives in the building and talk to them about why it is that they should be doing this at all. How you can tie into different parts of the business, ROI, ARR, again, the alphabet soup of all these amazing acronyms. But it's about being in service to your own program and your own survival and your own sustainability. Being able to speak all these languages is really critical, and knowing your audience and when it's appropriate or beneficial for you to be speaking the language of revenue, and when it's more important for you to be speaking the language of impact, because there are very distinct audiences for those different conversations.
For sure. And, for anyone who's listening to this and, getting a little sweaty and nervous, let me just say, rewind the power chat that we are just listening to, go back to the beginning, and the way that you're going to be able to accomplish what Bryan and Corey are sharing is what they shared at the top, which is know your audience, know your business, know your organization, know what your superpowers are as, an impact driver. And when you're doing work that is authentic and really related to the brand, the products, the company, the neighborhood that you're headquartered in, whatever it is, it's going to be much easier to wrap in all of the work that's just been discussed. If you're doing something that's kind of antiquated or ancillary, it's going to be really hard to accomplish this whole set. So, the question and the answer are really in the same, the same package. And it's really about getting to know your people, your product, your purpose.
No doubt.
So I can't believe it. Power chats are too short for such a great conversation, but we're at our last question. So the last question is hopefully, the most fun of all. Crystal ball. Where are we going from here? What do you all have your eyes on? I know you've mentioned a few things already. Maybe you just want to repin them, but for all of us listening at home, what are the things that we should be thinking about next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road to future-proof ourselves in this impact work?
I think it's really learn the language of business. If you are an impact professional, learn the language of business.
That was amazing brevity that I'm just not used to. I thought you were going to keep going.
I'm bringing my best stuff. I meditated for like an hour before this call.
Corey, do you want to take us home? Anything to add?
I mean, that is the number one thing that we want everybody to take away from this, is their ability to relate back to the business. But it's also, I think it's really critical for folks to understand that CSR may be dead, as we have all known it for a long, long time. And yet long live CSR in some form. So we need to figure out the best way to translate that into the next generation. And we think that the best way to do that is to align it with the core capabilities of the business. And so trying to find the most authentic way that you can do that in whatever your context is, I think is going to be really critical for everybody to be thinking about.
There's no doubt. And I would say, just as a longtime operator that's done this 5 or 6 times, and in many cases from the ground up, you have to, in your spirit and your heart, know that the business, literally this business that I just spoke to, the language of business, like that business needs to report to this higher strategy that is well integrated, that as the impact leader, you need to burn a bright torch on, because you are the chief provocateur. You are, with business language, the person who has to explain trade-offs in ways that many folks still don't quite understand, especially as things have become politicized. So in your heart, in your spirit, in your mind, know that your work in impact, regardless of what part of the acronym soup you're in, the business reports to this amazing mission, this higher calling that business needs to step up for right now. But you have to do that with the right languaging and do the right stakeholder audience management in the process to get there. But yeah, you need to burn a furnace bright and not be deterred.
Amazing. Well, really appreciate both of you, everything you do, everything you've done, what you're building now, and your
Thank you.
time. It's so fun to power chat with you, and I know everyone will really
It was
enjoy
great.
listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks for having us.